A poor young woman let a strange man and his son stay for the night, not knowing he was a very wealthy CEO. "Get away from the door!" Emily screamed, her voice tight with fear as she gripped the fire poker hard with both hands. "Please," a man's voice called from the other side, muffled by the heavy wind and snow. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just need a safe place for my son." Emily's heart was beating fast. Through the frozen glass, she could see the silhouette of a broad-shouldered man hunched over something smaller. A child. The snow was blowing around them in thick sheets. Her fingers squeezed the doorknob tighter. "I don't let strangers into my house," she said in a sharp voice, "and especially not men." There was a moment of silence. Then the voice spoke again, softer, more desperate this time. "I understand. I wouldn't ask this if I had any other choice. He's sick. He's freezing. We just need one night to be safe from the storm." Emily thought for a moment. The cold had already started seeping through the cabin's old wooden walls. The power had gone out an hour ago, and the fireplace was the only thing keeping the room from getting too cold. She looked at her phone. No signal, no one to call. Just her, and now them. She looked through the peephole again. The man shifted a little, revealing a small boy curled up in his arms. The boy coughed hard, a sharp, painful sound. That made her decide. With a loud squeak from the old door hinges, Emily opened it. The snow rushed in instantly, freezing her ankles through her socks. The man stepped forward just enough for her to see him better. He was tall, completely soaked, with his hair plastered to his forehead. The boy in his arms had his face hidden in the man's coat. His body was shaking. "Come in, quick," Emily murmured, stepping aside. "Thank you," the man said with a nod, walking in with the boy. She closed the door behind them and locked it. "Sit by the fireplace, don't touch anything else." The man did as he was told, gently placing the boy on the old sofa and unzipping his own jacket to wrap the child in it. Emily watched closely, still holding the poker. "Your name?" she asked firmly. "David," he replied. "And this is Eli. He's 7 years old, has a cough. Probably the flu." "You think so?" she said with disdain. "You're taking a child on foot through a snowstorm. That is very reckless." David looked down, brushing the wet hair from Eli's forehead. "We didn't have anywhere else to go." Emily paused, then turned toward the kitchen. "I have dry towels and instant soup. That's all." He nodded, thanking her quietly as she came back with the towels. He took them gratefully and began to gently dry the boy with the quiet care of a father. Emily watched from across the room with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't like this. Unexpected guests, bad memories. A year ago, she had trusted someone who knocked on her door with kind eyes and almost lost everything. Now this stranger was in her house. "Why are you here anyway?" she asked. "There's no one for miles around. The storm's been on the news for days." David looked up, a dark shadow of exhaustion in his eyes. "I was trying to get him to his grandmother's house, 2 towns over. The roads closed right behind us. We got stuck. Then the car died." She watched him in the firelight. He seemed normal, not dangerous, but not completely honest either. There was something hidden in his gaze, something he wasn't saying. But the boy, Eli, coughed weakly again. Emily let out a sharp breath and went to the kitchen. "Chicken noodle soup it is," she murmured. Minutes later, she brought 2 steaming mugs to the fire. David thanked her softly, handing the child's mug directly to him. Then he sat on the opposite side of the room. The silence that followed was thick, but not hostile. Just the sound of the crackling fire, the occasional clink of a spoon against a mug, and the wind howling outside. Eli slowly drifted off to sleep, his head resting on David's lap. Emily stared into the flames, forcing herself to stay awake. "You don't need to be afraid," David said quietly. "I'm not afraid," she replied, though her voice trembled. "You're letting 2 strangers into your home. I'd say you're brave, or maybe foolish." He smiled wryly. "I'd say the same about you." David chuckled softly. It was the first time the room felt a little less cold. "One night," she said firmly. "By morning, the storm should die down." "Then you leave." David nodded. "One night is all we need." She looked at the boy's sleeping face, then back at the man holding him so gently. For the first time in a long while, she wondered if opening the door had been a mistake, or the first right thing she'd done in years. The wind howled outside like a restless ghost, rattling the windows of the small cabin. The power was completely gone. Now the fire in the hearth flickered with a silent strength, casting golden shadows on the walls. Emily lit 2 old candles she'd kept in a kitchen drawer. Their flames trembled as she placed them on the table between her and David. The soup had cooled a little, but the warmth remained. Eli had only managed a few sips before falling back asleep, buried under coats and blankets on the sofa. His breathing was still uneven, but slower now, more steady. Emily sat on the floor near the fire, with her legs tucked under her, hands wrapped around a mug with a chipped rim. David sat across from her with his own mug, his face half lit by the firelight. In the candlelight, he seemed less imposing, like a normal person. Tired, but calm. "He loves chicken noodle soup," David said after a long silence, nodding toward his son. He laughed softly. "Sorry, it's a habit. His mom passed away a few years ago, but whenever I made Eli chicken noodle soup, I always said it was because she would have done it too." Emily looked at the boy, and her face softened. "He's sweet, well-behaved." "I try," David said. Then he looked down. "He's all I've got." There was a fragility in his voice that made Emily shift in her seat. She wasn't used to that. Most men she'd known, especially the ones who showed up in the middle of storms, hid secrets behind their charm. But David wasn't trying to impress her. He was just here, and honest. "I'm sorry about his mother," she said. "Thank you." He caught her gaze, and for a moment the fire crackled between them like a bridge being built slowly. Emily stood up. "I have a clean blanket in the back. I'll go get it." She walked down the hall, passing over the creaking floorboards to her linen closet. She paused as she reached for her softest quilt, the one her grandmother had made years ago. It was white, with little blue flowers. She rarely used it, keeping it carefully folded at the very top of the stack. She sighed, then pulled it down. When she walked back into the living room, she stopped short in the doorway. David was sitting on the floor next to Eli. The boy was half asleep, whimpering softly. David, not knowing she was there, dipped a cloth into a bowl of water, then wrung it out carefully. With slow, practiced hands, he gently pressed the cool cloth against the boy's forehead, whispering so low Emily couldn't hear the words. The cloth was hers, one of the last clean white hand towels she had, kept safe, separate from the others. She watched as David rinsed the cloth again, wiped Eli's cheeks, then carefully folded the towel and placed it next to the bowl. Then he got up, went into the kitchen, and washed the cloth thoroughly before putting it back in its place, folded exactly how she had kept it. He never saw her watching. Emily looked down at the quilt in her arms, then slowly stepped back into the room. "Here," she said softly, handing it to him. David turned, a bit surprised. "This is beautiful." "It's warm," she replied. "And it's clean." He took it, his hand brushing briefly against hers. "Thank you." She sat back down by the fire, but this time a little closer. For the first time in a long while, the room felt full, not just of people, but of something else, of presence, of peace. As David settled back down next to his son, tucking the blanket around the boy's small frame, he looked at Emily. "You didn't have to let us in," he said gently. "I know," she replied. "You didn't have to feed us, or offer us your best blanket, or pretend you weren't scared." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not pretending." He smiled faintly, but it was real. "Still," he said, "thank you for everything. I won't forget tonight." Neither of them said anything after that. The fire crackled, the wind howled, but in the heart of the storm, the little cabin glowed softly, and for one night, the warmth won out. The snow had stopped. By morning, the world outside the cabin was covered in a thick, white silence. The roads were hidden beneath the storm. Trees bowed under the weight of the snow, and even the faint tracks from the night before had vanished. Emily stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in a heavy coat, and looked up at the sky. Nothing but white. "They say the county might not clear the roads until tomorrow," she said as she walked back inside. David looked up from where he was spoon-feeding Eli hot soup. "So we're trapped." She nodded. "Another night, at least." He met her gaze. "I'm sorry. It's not your fault," she said, though her voice held a touch of exhaustion. "Let's make the best of it." That day, they fell into a routine neither of them expected. David offered to chop wood, swinging the axe with clean, skillful force behind the cabin. Emily, surprised by his strength and precision, watched from the window before returning to the kitchen. She made fresh cookie dough and started a pot of homemade chicken soup, the smell of thyme and garlic filling the room. When a leak appeared near the back door, David fixed it, with tools he borrowed from the old shed, balancing on a wobbly chair with careful hands. He fixed the bedroom door, hinge without being asked, and reinforced the coat rack near the entrance, smiling when Emily raised an eyebrow. "You're good with your hands," she noted. "Years of fixing what I couldn't afford to replace," he replied. Eli's cough continued throughout the morning. His forehead felt warm again. Emily didn't hesitate. She made ginger tea with honey. She cooled it to a safe temperature and held the cup for him to sip. She dampened a cloth with warm water, checking his temperature with gentle fingers. When he grew restless, she pulled a faded, well-loved teddy bear from a box in the bedroom. She sat beside him on the sofa, whispering stories as she dried his cheeks. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, stroking his hair. "We're going to get you well." David, watching silently from the kitchen, said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He was used to doing it all, being mother and father, protector and provider. Seeing Emily care for Eli with such tenderness stirred something deep inside him. She had no duty here, no reason. Yet, there she was, kneeling on the hard floor beside a child who wasn't hers, singing softly to herself as she wiped the sweat from his brow. Later that afternoon, while Emily went to get more blankets, David stood in the bedroom doorway and watched. She was sitting on the floor by Eli's bed, his small hand held gently between both of hers. She was humming a lullaby, perhaps one from her own childhood. The teddy bear was tucked in beside him. Her golden hair fell forward as she leaned in to press her hand against his forehead again. Every movement was full of care, of presence. David's throat tightened. He turned away before she could see the pain in his eyes. That night, while the wind howled outside and the cabin glowed with firelight, the three of them gathered in the living room. Emily told a fairy tale, something about a brave girl who calmed a snowstorm using nothing but kindness. Her voice danced around the room, and Eli clapped when she finished. David made animals out of scraps of folded paper, his attempts clumsy but sweet. Eli giggled when he saw a paper moose with lopsided antlers fall over. Then Eli pulled out a little notebook and some colored pencils Emily had given him. He drew quickly, the tip of his tongue sticking out in concentration. When he was done, he tore out the page and held it up proudly. "This is you," he said, pointing to a figure with golden hair. Opening the door, the drawing showed a snow-covered cabin. A tall man and a little boy were standing outside. A woman was opening the door, with a golden light glowing behind her. He stuck it to the wall with a piece of leftover packing tape. "This is my second home," he announced. Emily stared at the drawing, speechless. David looked at her, not with gratitude this time, but with something deeper. The way her fingers brushed against Eli's hair, the warmth she put into everything she did, her silent strength. He smiled, and for the first time in a long, long time, he felt the delicate and terrifying beginnings of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. The storm had passed. The sun rose weakly behind the clouds, casting a silvery gray glow over the snow-covered trees. Emily stood in the cabin doorway, already dressed in her thick coat and scarf, her work boots crunching softly on the porch. The air was still biting cold, but clear enough that the roads could finally be cleared. Inside, David and Eli were still asleep, curled up together on the sofa, breathing softly in the early morning light. Emily paused at the door. She wanted to say something, anything, to ask if they'd still be there when she got back, to offer them another night, but the words caught in her throat. This was her first shift in days, and she couldn't afford to miss it. So she stoked the fire, left extra wood by the hearth, and placed a small note on the kitchen counter. "Back at 4, make yourselves at home." By the time she reached the small-town diner where she worked part-time, her thoughts had drifted constantly back to them. Every time the bell above the door jingled, she looked up. But it was never David, never Eli. When her shift ended, she practically sprinted to catch the bus back up the mountain road. The sky was turning orange by the time she reached her cabin. The porch was silent. No footprints in the fresh layer of snow. No laughter coming from inside. Her heart sank. She pushed the door open. The fire had died down but was still burning. The blankets were neatly folded. The dishes in the sink were washed and drying. The room was clean, almost as if no one had been there. They were gone. A sharp ache bloomed in her chest. On the dining table lay a folded piece of paper, weighed down by something small and smooth. She walked over slowly. The paper was pale yellow, lightly lined. Her name wasn't on it, but she knew it was for her. She unfolded it. Thank you for the warmth, for the kindness, for showing me that people like you still exist in this world. I will never forget this. There was no signature, just a line underneath, written in a softer, almost hesitant hand. You helped more than you know. Next to the note was a black card. No name, no bank logo, just a small chip and a strip of numbers. She picked it up, her heart pounding in her chest. It was heavier than a normal credit card. Smooth. Mysterious. A black card, the kind only very wealthy people carry. She stared at it in shock. First came confusion, then disbelief, then something she couldn't quite name. She set it down slowly and sat on the edge of the sofa, right where David had sat the night before, telling stories to his son. Her fingers tightened around the note. He had left without saying goodbye, without an explanation, without letting her say what had started growing in her heart. She hadn't expected it to hurt like this. She thought she'd feel relief, space to breathe, having her house back to herself. But instead, she felt an emptiness, as if someone had opened a door in her heart and left before she even knew they had come in. Her eyes burned. The cabin was silent, and for the first time in a long time, Emily cried. Not out of fear, not out of pain, but from the ache of missing something she never expected to find, and not knowing if she'd ever see it again. The next morning, Emily stood in line at the town's only bank, with the mysterious black card clutched tight in her coat pocket. Her breath fogged up the glass doors as she waited to be let in. The whole way there, her mind had been at war with itself. One part screamed at her to use it. The other held tight to the one thing she'd always valued, her pride. When her number was called, she approached the counter with unsteady steps. I found this, she said, placing the card gently on the counter. I just want to know who it belongs to. The teller gave her a strange look, but typed in a few numbers. After a few seconds, her eyebrows shot up. This is a private account, the woman said carefully. No name publicly linked to it. Very high status. I can't share details, but whoever gave you this must trust you a lot. I don't want the money, Emily said quickly. I'm not here to use it. I needed to know. The woman nodded slowly and slid the card back across the counter. Emily left with more questions than answers and tucked the card away in a drawer. Never used, never touched. Days turned into weeks. The snow began to melt. The wind grew softer, and the nights quieter. Emily went back to her usual life, fixing up the cabin, working at the library 2 days a week, taking extra shifts at the diner when she could. But everything felt a little less bright. The sound of laughter from that stormy night stayed with her, just like the image of a dark-haired man sitting by the fire, making paper animals for his son. She found herself waking up in the middle of the night, staring at the door, half expecting to hear a knock. Then, one Monday morning, everything fell apart. She arrived at the small village library, only to find a sign taped to the door, permanently closed. Funding withdrawn. Inside, her boss was packing up the last of the books. I'm so sorry, Emily, the woman said, barely able to look her in the eye. They've stopped supporting rural locations. There's nothing we can do. She walked home that day with her legs feeling numb. Every step felt heavier than the last. 2 jobs lost in less than 3 months. No family, no support, and the bills were already piling up. By the end of the week, her wood pile was getting smaller. The fridge was half empty. Her savings account dropped to $20. She tried selling crafts online, even her old typewriter, but nothing worked. The silence in the cabin grew heavier with each passing day. Then the letter arrived. It came on a Wednesday afternoon, slipped under her door in a thick, cream-colored envelope. Her name was handwritten in neat, careful lettering. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single-page letter printed on high-quality paper. Dear Miss Emily Thompson, we are pleased to invite you to a private interview for the newly launched community outreach program within Aaron Holdings. We are looking for individuals with exceptional character, strong values, and demonstrated kindness Your name was personally suggested. Please come to our downtown office at the time listed below. Travel arrangements have been made for you. Sincerely, David R., CEO of Aaron Holdings. Her hands trembled. She read it over and over again. She sat down abruptly on the edge of the sofa, right where he had once sat. She pressed the letter to her chest, breathing deeply. He remembered her, and he had found her. She didn't know what this interview was, or why now, or why after all this time he had reached out. But one thing was clear. Her story with David wasn't over yet. Emily stood in the main lobby of the gleaming glass building. The polished marble floors reflected her boots, which were still scuffed with mud from the mountain path. The ceiling soared high above her, decorated with golden light, and the people around her moved with quiet purpose, in sharp suits and flawless heels. She felt like a stranger in a foreign land. Clutching the invitation letter in one hand, she approached the receptionist. I have an appointment with Aaron Holdings. My name is Emily Thompson. Yes, Miss Thompson, the woman finished, smiling warmly. We've been expecting you. Please take the elevator to the 32nd floor. Mr. Rivera will meet you there, personally. Emily blinked. Mr. Rivera? Yes, the receptionist said, already calling someone on her headset. He's the CEO. She stepped into the elevator, her heart pounding. The numbers above the doors ticked upward. Every floor brought back a memory. Eli laughing by the fire, David feeding him soup, his voice thanking her in the quiet of a snowy night. When the doors slid open, the space before her was silent and elegant. A woman in a dark blue dress gestured politely and led her to a large office with glass walls. And there he was. David was standing by the window, tall and composed, in a charcoal gray suit. He had his back to her, but as she entered, he turned around. Their eyes met. Time stood still for a moment. He smiled. Warm, steady, familiar. Emily. She caught her breath. David. He took a step forward, his hands relaxed at his sides. He looked the same, yet different. Somehow stronger, more in control, but with that same quiet kindness in his eyes. I wondered if you'd come, he said. You invited me, she replied softly. I was hoping you'd say yes, he said gently. Then he gestured to the small seating area near the window. Please, have a seat. She sat in the armchair, gripping the sides lightly. He walked over to a nearby shelf, pulled out a flat folder, and handed it to her. Inside was a single piece of paper. A child's drawing, the cabin in the snow. A tall man, a little boy, and a blonde woman opening the door. Her eyes widened. You kept it, she whispered. I took it, David admitted. That morning, I knew Eli would want me to. He called you our angel that night. I wanted to keep a piece of what that night meant. She looked up at him. David sat opposite her now, leaning forward. I didn't tell you who I was. I didn't plan to show up that night, but I've spent the past month trying to figure out how to repay something that can't be repaid. Emily shook her head slowly. I didn't do anything special. You gave us shelter, dignity. You gave Eli warmth and safety when we had neither. And you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. He paused. Hope. She didn't speak. Her hands tightened around the drawing. David continued, his voice steady. I used to think the only way to build something lasting was through power, through control. But you showed me what true strength looks like. Quiet, brave, kind. I started a program. Community outreach, education, rural aid. All of it based on that night. He stood up and walked to his desk, picking up another folder. And I want you to run it. Emily blinked. Me? He nodded. You've lived it. You understand what it means to give without expecting anything in return. That is the kind of leadership I want. She looked at the folder in her lap, then back at him. Her voice trembled. This isn't about money, is it? David smiled. No, it never was. She looked at him. This man who had once sat by a fire, dressed in boots and flannel, who was now offering her not just a job, but a place in the story he was still writing. And she nodded. I'll do it, she said. Not for the title, not for the office, but because in his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in her own reflection for a long time. Purpose. And because she believed in him, not just as a CEO, but as the man who'd once whispered, "Thank you," in the dark, and meant every single word. The weeks that followed passed with a quiet rhythm, but each day brought Emily and David closer together. Their new program under Aaron Holdings, called the Open Door Initiative, focused on offering long-term shelter, job training, and childcare for single parents and the homeless. The foundation was built around the idea Emily had, unknowingly shown the night she opened her cabin door, that unconditional kindness changes lives. In every meeting room, on every site visit, in every late-night email exchange. They were side by side. They debated passionately. David was practical, focused on results. Emily was empathetic and fiercely protective of every person's voice. Sometimes they disagreed, but they always listened. And in the end, they always found a path forward that had both honesty and heart. Emily had never felt so truly understood. Every morning, a coffee was waiting on her desk, exactly how she liked it. 2 sugars, no cream, with cinnamon on top. David never said a word about it, but she noticed. Every time. Some nights they worked late, reviewing plans, hashing out tricky details. Other nights he'd walk her in silence to her car, their shoulders occasionally brushing in the dark. Still, not a word was spoken about what was growing between them, just lingering glances and actions that meant more than either dared to say out loud. Then came the gala, a grand public event held at the company's main site, a converted warehouse now used as a modern temporary living center. Donors, reporters, city officials, and non-profit leaders filled the room. Emily, wearing a simple dark blue dress, gave a speech about the night everything changed, about the firelight, the soup, and a boy with a fever. She didn't mention David by name, but the moment she stepped off the stage, a reporter stopped her. Some say your rapid rise within Aaron Holdings is due to a personal relationship with Mr. Rivera. Can you confirm or deny that your position is a result of favoritism? Emily froze. She gasped for air. Her hands trembled slightly, but she stood her ground. I was offered this position based on... She never finished. David stepped forward calmly, but with clear intention. His voice was steady as he addressed the small crowd that had gathered. If I may, he said, placing a steady hand on Emily's back. Then, without a second thought, he gently took her hand in his and turned to face the room. The woman standing beside me changed the direction of my life, he said, his voice showing something deeper than just defending her. When I had nothing, no power, no title, she offered shelter to me and my son without asking for anything in return. He looked at Emily, and something passed between them that silenced even the most skeptical reporter. She didn't see a CEO or a man with power. She saw 2 people in need and opened her door. He turned back to the crowd. Everything we have built here was born from that moment. And if this company has done anything good since then, it's because of her heart. Silence fell. Then the applause. Emily looked down at their joined hands. Still warm, still firm. She had no idea when he had taken her hand, or why her heart felt like it might burst from something too full to contain. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and the guests had gone, they stood alone in the center of the room. You didn't have to say all that, she whispered. David looked at her, his eyes soft. Yes, I did. And for the first time, he didn't let go. Winter returned gently. The snow fell like a soft blanket, covering the fir trees and winding paths with silent grace. At the end of one of those paths stood the old cabin, no longer forgotten, now carefully restored. Its basic structure was the same, its spirit intact, warm, simple, waiting. David had invited Emily and Eli for the weekend. After a year of working side by side, building shelters, starting programs, and learning each other's ways, it felt right. Still, Emily hadn't known where they were going until the last turn. She gasped when she saw it. The cabin stood there like a memory brought to life. Their boots crunched on the newly smoothed steps. The front door still made a creaking sound. Pine and cinnamon lingered in the air, just as she remembered. And above the fireplace, carefully placed in a glass frame, hung the drawing of a golden-haired woman, opening her door to a man and his son in the snow. You kept it, she whispered. David smiled softly. It was the first place Eli called home again. The weekend unfolded gently. They cooked together in the small kitchen, now filled with laughter. Music played softly from the speakers David had installed. Eli ran from room to room, like he had always belonged there, asking if they could stay forever. That night, after dinner, Eli fell asleep on the sofa, under the same quilt she had once covered him with. Emily stepped out onto the porch with her arms crossed against the cold, watching the snow fall. David joined her in silence. After a long, quiet moment, he turned to her. "Will you come with me for a moment?" She followed him to the steps where warm light spilled out from the cabin behind them. He reached into his coat pocket and knelt down. Not in a grand hall, but in the exact spot where she had once opened the door to him. He held out a simple silver ring. Inside the band were 6 small words. "Thank you for opening the door." His eyes met hers. "I used to believe I didn't deserve a family," he said softly, "that what I lost couldn't be found again. But you changed that with your hands, with your heart. You made a place for us when no one else would." His eyes filled with tears. "I won't promise that everything will be perfect," he continued, "but I promise to always keep the door open for you, for him, and for whatever we build together." He held the ring. His hand was trembling slightly. "Will you open it one more time? This time? For a lifetime?" Emily didn't answer with words. She knelt beside him, embraced him, and held on tight, just like she once had with his son. Not with fear, but with love. A small sound broke the moment. Eli stood in the doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Miss Emily? Mommy? You made Daddy smile like on the first night." David laughed, hugging Emily tighter. She wiped her eyes and looked at the boy who, without knowing it, had connected their lives. Then at the man who had finally come home. The snow kept falling around them, soft and silent. No big crowd, no sparkling diamond, just a door once opened in a storm and never closed again. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the simple act of opening a door. In the quiet moments between storms, Emily often reflected on how a single act of kindness had rippled into a nationwide network of support centers, inspiring communities across America to embrace similar initiatives. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness matters, that love can arrive quietly, and that second chances often come wrapped in snow and silence, then we invite you to be part of more moments like this. Subscribe to Quiet Life Stories for more tales of hope, love, strength, and the little decisions that change lives forever. Allow your heart to remember, one story at a time.